her lap, the tremors in her fingers betraying her nerves. The distance between them felt like miles. Not just the space in the car, but the chasm that had always existed between who she used to be and the woman she was becoming. "Move," Jesse's voice was clipped, cold. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Caroline barely acknowledged him, her gaze fixed out the window, her stomach churning with the weight of the moment. She couldn't bring herself to look at him, not yet. She had been pulled into this life, forced into it, but she hadn't asked for any of it. She didn't want to be here, didn't want to be a part of the robbery, but there was nothing she could do now. She was caught in a current too strong to swim against, too deep to climb out of. Her father's face flashed in her mind, his words sharp and full of betrayal. "You've thrown your life away, Caroline. I won't let you be a part of this family anymore." She had tried to follow the rules, tried to be the dutiful daughter, the one who didn't make mistakes. But now, here she was, sitting beside a criminal, an outlaw, about to rob a bank. The car slowed as they neared the small town. It wasn't much, just a dot on a map, the kind of place where no one asked questions and everyone turned a blind eye. Jesse slowed to a crawl, checking the street for any signs of law enforcement. He didn't say a word, but Caroline could feel the tension in his muscles, the stillness in the air as he prepared. "Don't make a sound," he said, his voice barely more than a growl. "You follow my lead, and we get in and out. Got it?" Caroline nodded, her mouth dry, her heart thumping hard in her chest. She didn't know how she had gotten here. How the daughter of a respected judge had ended up in a car with a man like Jesse Crowe, someone who had spent his life on the run. But here she was. And there was no going back now. The car came to a stop in front of the bank. Jesse cut the engine, the silence that followed almost deafening. Caroline stared at the door of the bank, the gleaming windows reflecting her own face back at her, a face she barely recognized anymore. Jesse glanced at her, his eyes hard, unreadable. "We go in, we get the money, and we leave. No one gets hurt unless they force it." Caroline opened her mouth, but the words stuck in her throat. She wanted to ask him if he believed that, if he really thought they wouldn't hurt anyone, if they wouldn't cross a line they couldn't come back from. But the words never came. Instead, she reached for the door handle, her hands trembling. The world outside the car seemed to pulse with a low, ominous hum. This wasn't the life she had imagined for herself. She had been a good daughter, a quiet student. She had followed the rules. But somewhere along the way, the rules had changed, and now she was just a pawn in someone else's game. The door creaked open, and Jesse moved swiftly, his body sliding out of the car with a grace that made it clear this wasn't his first time doing something like this. Caroline hesitated, but there was no time to second-guess herself. If she didn't get out of the car now, she would lose whatever small bit of control she had left. She followed him, her boots crunching softly on the gravel, her mind racing, her stomach tight. The bank was just a few steps away now. There was no turning back. The door opened, and they stepped inside. The smell of paper and ink hit her instantly, the smell of money, of transactions that could change lives. The noise inside was low, the hum of murmured conversations and the scratch of pens on paper. No one looked up. No one saw them at first. Jesse's hand was already on the gun at his side. He moved fast, his voice cold. "Everyone down on the floor. Now." The room went silent. Panic spread like a ripple across the room, but it was too late. Jesse's voice was sharp, a command. People dropped to the ground, their hands instinctively going up in surrender. The clerk behind the counter froze, wide-eyed, before her hand went to the panic button under the desk. Caroline's breath caught in her throat. Jesse's eyes locked on the woman, his voice low and threatening. "You hit that button, and someone gets hurt." The woman froze, her face pale, her hands trembling as she slowly pulled back from the counter. Caroline's heart was pounding in her ears now. Her fingers were cold against the handle of the gun Jesse had given her, but it felt like a foreign object in her hand. She had never wanted to hold a gun, had never imagined herself in this situation. But here she was, standing in the middle of a robbery, a gun in her hand. Her eyes darted to the door, to the windows, but no one was coming. They were alone, for now. Jesse was moving again, quick, efficient. His voice was calm, like he had done this 1,000 times. "Caroline, the safe." "Now." She didn't answer, didn't think about it. She just moved. The gun felt heavier in her hand as she walked toward the back, toward the safe where the money was kept. She wasn't sure what she was doing. She wasn't sure how she had gotten here. But she did it. She moved. The clerk at the back was too scared to protest, too scared to do anything but point to the door of the vault. Caroline's breath caught in her throat as she punched in the code on the keypad. The vault door creaked open, and she stepped inside, her fingers shaking as she grabbed the cash, stuffing it into the bag Jesse had given her. Everything was happening too fast. Too much, too soon. The sound of a door opening behind her made her turn, but it wasn't Jesse. It was the sheriff. His gun was already drawn, his face contorted with anger. "Drop it," he shouted. Caroline's heart stopped. Time slowed down as she stood frozen, the gun still in her hand. Jesse's voice cut through the tension. "Don't do it, Sheriff." The sheriff's eyes darted between Jesse and Caroline, his finger tightening on the trigger. Caroline's breath caught in her throat as she raised the gun. It was instinct now. The first shot rang out, deafening. Then another. The sheriff collapsed to the ground, his body falling limp. Caroline's hands shook. She didn't know what she had just done. She couldn't breathe. She could barely think. The world felt like it was spinning, like everything she had known was gone in that one moment. Jesse's voice broke through the chaos. "Caroline. We're done here." She snapped back to reality, her chest heaving as she grabbed the bag of money, stumbling out of the vault. Jesse grabbed her arm, pulling her out the door and back to the car. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, but it didn't matter anymore. They had done it. They were already in the car, speeding away. Caroline's eyes were wide, her hands trembling. The gun still felt foreign in her hand, but now it was hers. And as the distance between them and the bank grew, something inside her changed. She wasn't the woman she had been. Not anymore. The first shot had been fired. And there was no going back. The world outside the car blurred into an endless stretch of road, the sharp bite of the wind cutting through the cracked window. Caroline sat next to Jesse, her fingers tightly gripping the edge of the seat as they sped away from the bank. Her heart was still pounding, a frantic beat that echoed in her ears. The air in the car was thick, suffocating, and despite the speed, it felt like they were stuck in a moment, trapped between who they were and who they were becoming. She had never imagined she'd be here, never thought her life would take this turn. But it had, and now there was no going back. The robbery, the gun, the violence, it was all real. The line she had crossed felt jagged and sharp, and every mile between them and the bank only deepened the wound. Jesse's eyes were fixed on the road, his expression unreadable. His hands were steady on the wheel, but Caroline could feel the tension in him, the way his jaw clenched, the way his knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. He was in control, but just barely. "I didn't think it would be like that," Caroline said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt heavy in her mouth, like she was trying to pull herself out of a fog. "I thought it would be quick. Simple." Jesse didn't answer at first, his eyes flickering toward her for the briefest moment. "Nothing's ever simple, Caroline. You should have known that by now." Caroline closed her eyes, letting the wind whip through her hair, the cold sharp enough to bite at her skin. It didn't matter. She couldn't feel it. The weight of the decision she had made, the gun in her hand, the shot she had fired, all of it pressed in on her, suffocating her from the inside out. She wasn't just the judge's daughter anymore. She wasn't even just a criminal now. She was something else, something new, something dangerous. "Why me?" she asked quietly, her voice shaking slightly. "Why did you bring me into this?" Jesse's grip tightened on the wheel, his jaw setting even more firmly. "You think I wanted this for you? You think I wanted you in this mess?" His voice was rough, almost bitter, but there was something else beneath it, something close to regret. "You were always in it, Caroline. Always." You just didn't know it yet. She blinked, trying to push away the sting in her chest. That's not true. He didn't respond, his eyes locked ahead as the road twisted beneath them. The silence stretched between them like a canyon, a space too wide for either of them to cross. Caroline didn't know if she wanted him to speak or not. There were so many things she wanted to say, so many questions she had about the life Jesse had pulled her into. But every time she opened her mouth, the words felt like they would choke her. The car hummed as they sped through the empty road, the dark landscape stretching endlessly on both sides. It felt like they were heading nowhere, a place of no return, a place where only the next move mattered. You don't trust me, do you? Jesse asked suddenly, his voice low. Caroline glanced at him, her heart skipping. I don't know what to trust anymore. Jesse's eyes flickered toward her again, his gaze almost unreadable. You don't have to trust me. But you do have to trust this. I'm trying to get us out of this. Out of everything. We just need to keep moving. Keep our heads down. Caroline nodded, though she didn't feel reassured. She didn't know if she could trust him, or even if she could trust herself. But what choice did she have? She had already made her decision. She had already fired the shot. The car slowed as they approached a small, rundown barn tucked off the main road. Jesse pulled the car to a stop, the engine rumbling softly as he shifted the gears. He didn't speak, just threw the car into park and cut the engine. We'll stay here for a while, he said, glancing toward her. It's not much, but it'll do for tonight. Caroline nodded and followed him as he got out of the car. Her legs felt like lead, stiff from the long drive, and her stomach churned as she stepped into the dry dirt. The barn was silent, its wooden frame creaking in the wind. She followed Jesse inside, the smell of hay and dust filling the air. He pulled open a small door at the back, revealing a makeshift area to sleep. It wasn't much, a couple of blankets tossed on the floor, a few crates to sit on, but it was shelter. For now. Caroline dropped her bag and sank down onto the floor, her back against one of the crates. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath, trying to push away the panic that threatened to rise in her throat. You good? Jesse's voice was low, cautious. She didn't answer at first. She wasn't sure what good meant anymore. The weight of what they had done sat heavy in the pit of her stomach. Yeah, she said finally, her voice quieter than she intended. I'm fine. Jesse didn't push her for more. Instead, he sat on the floor beside her, pulling his knees up to his chest. There was a long silence between them, a space filled with all the things they weren't saying. The past. The future. Everything they had lost and everything they still had to fight for. I didn't want you to be here, Jesse said suddenly, his voice rough, filled with something that might have been guilt. I never wanted you to be a part of this. Caroline turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. But I am. I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere. Jesse's eyes flickered with something unreadable, but he didn't say anything. For a moment, Caroline almost thought he would reach out to her, but he didn't. He just stayed there, his gaze distant, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. They sat there for what felt like hours, the weight of everything hanging between them. The silence was suffocating, but it was all they had. There was no room for anything else. Finally, Jesse stood up, his movements slow, as though the weight of the world was pulling him down. I'll keep watch. Get some rest. Caroline nodded again, but she didn't lie down. Instead, she stayed seated, her thoughts racing, her hands trembling in her lap. What had she become? What had she allowed herself to do? She didn't know anymore. But she knew one thing, she couldn't go back. And for better or worse, she was in this now. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale, washed-out light over the barren landscape. Caroline sat against the barn's splintered wall, her legs stretched out before her, her back sore from the rough bedding. She hadn't slept much, not because she was afraid of the dark, but because every time she closed her eyes, all she saw was the robbery. The bank. The sheriff. The shot. It was too much. Jesse was up already, pacing back and forth outside, his silhouette sharp against the morning sky. The long stretch of empty road behind them seemed endless, a reminder of the lives they had left behind and the ones they couldn't escape. Caroline tried to shake the image of the sheriff's face out of her mind, the way his eyes had gone wide with surprise and shock just before the shot had rang out. She had never killed anyone before. Never thought she could. But in that moment, there had been no choice. It had been him or them. But that didn't make it right. It didn't make it any easier. She glanced at Jesse through the barn's small crack in the wall. He hadn't spoken much since they'd arrived, his eyes distant and preoccupied. He'd made it clear they needed to keep moving, keep running. He had no time for regrets, and neither did she. But she couldn't help it. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was breaking inside her. Something she didn't know how to fix. She stood, brushing the dirt off her pants, and walked outside to where Jesse was standing, his face hidden in the shadows. "You're up early," she said, her voice almost too quiet. Jesse didn't turn around at first. He just stared out at the empty horizon, his eyes narrowed against the wind. "Can't sleep." Caroline stepped beside him, looking at the same empty stretch of road. It was desolate, nothing but dirt and rocks, stretching out for miles. There was nowhere to hide here. Nowhere to run. "What now?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Jesse let out a low sigh. "We keep moving." He looked at her finally, his eyes hard, but there was something there, something dark. "There's no other way." Caroline bit her lip, her heart hammering. She had already made a decision, one she couldn't take back. But this wasn't just about running anymore. This was about surviving. And she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to do that. "What about Maggie?" she asked suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. "You never told me what happened to her." Jesse's face tightened at the mention of the name. He turned sharply to face her. "Maggie's gone. She made her choice. And so did we." Caroline watched him, searching his face for any hint of emotion. "You never told me what happened between you two." Jesse didn't answer at first, his jaw working as if he were considering whether to speak. He looked away, his eyes darkening. "It doesn't matter. What matters now is getting out of this alive." "But it does matter, Jesse," Caroline insisted, stepping closer to him. "You can't keep running from everything. You can't keep running from your past. Sooner or later, it catches up with you." Jesse clenched his fists, his eyes cold. "I don't have time for this." He turned, his voice low and fierce. "You want to talk about choices? Then you tell me what you want. You want to go back to your father? You want to walk away from this?" Caroline's chest tightened. "I didn't choose this. I didn't choose any of this. But you're here now." Jesse's voice was sharper than she expected, a quiet accusation laced in every word. "And you're not going anywhere." Her breath hitched. She wanted to yell, to scream that she had never asked for any of this, that she had never wanted her life to end up this way. But she knew the truth now. There was no going back. She shook her head, her voice softer. "What do we do now, Jesse? What happens to us after all this?" Jesse looked at her, his face unreadable, but his eyes told a different story. She could see the struggle in them, the way he was fighting something. But what? What was he really afraid of? "We survive. That's all we can do." Caroline swallowed hard. "I don't know if I can do this anymore." Jesse didn't say anything. He just turned away, walking toward the car, his every step filled with the weight of the past. Caroline followed, her mind a whirl of confusion, anger, and fear. They were both broken. She knew that now. But how much longer could they both keep pretending they weren't? The drive was silent. The miles stretched on, the landscape a blur of dust and dry land. Caroline tried not to think about the faces they had left behind, her father's angry face, Maggie's desperate plea, the sheriff's wide-eyed expression before the shot. They passed through small towns, each one just as empty and lifeless as the last. No one cared. No one noticed. And that was the worst part. They were invisible. Ghosts in a world that had no place for them. Eventually, Jessie pulled off the road into a small, deserted clearing. There was a cluster of trees in the distance, and a small creek trickled through the dry dirt. It was a place to rest, a place to lie low. But it was also a place to breathe. "We stay here for the night," Jessie said, getting out of the car. He didn't look at her as he spoke. "Get some sleep. We keep moving at dawn." Caroline nodded, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. She wanted to say something about what had happened, about what was happening to them, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she got out of the car and walked toward the edge of the clearing, away from Jessie, away from the suffocating silence that seemed to follow them everywhere. The evening sky was a deep shade of purple, the stars just beginning to peek through the thin layer of clouds. Caroline sat on the ground, pulling her knees to her chest. She thought of the life she had left behind. The life she had tried to protect. And then she thought of the life she was living now. It was too late to turn back. She had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. But for a moment, just a moment, she allowed herself to hope. To hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way out of this. Together. But the wind was picking up now, carrying with it the scent of something she couldn't place, something old, something dangerous. And deep down, Caroline knew they weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. The morning sun beat down, heavy and unforgiving. Caroline felt the heat cling to her skin, a suffocating reminder of the world she had stepped into. The small clearing where they had stopped the night before was still, the only sound the gentle rustle of dry leaves in the wind. It should have been peaceful, but it wasn't. There was too much at stake. Too many questions left unanswered. Caroline rubbed her eyes, trying to push away the fog of exhaustion. The past few days had been a blur, driving, hiding, running. She had barely slept, barely eaten. All she could focus on was the gnawing hunger that seemed to stretch beyond her body and into her soul. She had never asked for any of this. She had never imagined herself in a world like this. And yet here she was. She reached for the water jug in the back of the car, but her hand trembled as she unscrewed the cap. Her stomach churned, but it wasn't from hunger. It wasn't from exhaustion. It was something else. Something deeper. Her mind drifted back to the night before, to the strange sense of foreboding that had washed over her when she had stepped into the small clearing. The sound of the wind, the way the trees seemed to whisper, the distant feeling of being watched, it all felt wrong. But she couldn't explain why. Caroline closed her eyes for a moment, letting the cool water soothe her throat, but it didn't help. The unease lingered, gnawing at her from the inside out. She tried to push it away, to focus on what was ahead, on the next step. But every time she thought about the future, her mind returned to the baby growing inside her. The child she hadn't planned for, the child she wasn't sure she could protect. Caroline's hand rested gently on her stomach. She hadn't been able to escape the truth, she was pregnant. And that realization had only added to the weight of everything else she was carrying. She didn't want this life for her child. She didn't want this violence, this endless running. She wanted something better, something safer. But she didn't know how to give that to them. The crack of a branch snapped her out of her thoughts. She looked up, startled, to see Jessie approaching, his eyes scanning the horizon, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. He looked worn down, like the road had already taken its toll on him. But that was nothing new. It had always been this way. "We leave at dawn," he said, his voice low. "We need to keep moving." Caroline nodded, her throat tight. "Where to?" Jessie didn't answer immediately. He simply stood there, looking out at the empty landscape, his eyes distant. "Somewhere we won't be found," he said finally, his voice flat. Caroline swallowed, her thoughts still clouded. She wasn't sure what to believe anymore. Every time they made a plan, it felt like they were running in circles. No matter where they went, no matter how far they traveled, there was always someone behind them. Someone waiting. Jessie's gaze shifted toward her, a flicker of something she couldn't quite place in his eyes. "You all right?" Caroline nodded again, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "Yeah. Just tired." Jesse didn't push. He simply turned and walked toward the car, leaving her standing there, her hands still trembling, her heart racing in her chest. The day passed in a blur of dust and miles of barren land. They drove through towns that felt abandoned, empty shells of places that once held life. It was as if the world had already forgotten about them, leaving them to roam, to be lost in the spaces between. Caroline couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. Every time they passed a car or a group of people, her eyes would dart to the rearview mirror, her heart leaping in her chest. But there was no one. Only the road. Jesse didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did, but he never spoke of it. By late afternoon, they found a secluded spot by a dried-up creek, the land scattered with rocks and patches of grass that hadn't seen water in years. It was a place to rest, to breathe. Jesse set up camp, and Caroline stood at the edge of the creek, staring down at the dry earth. The heat from the sun had left the ground cracked and brittle, the once green patches of grass now nothing more than yellowed stalks. She had never seen a place like this before. It felt empty, like the land itself was abandoned. Like everything in the world had moved on, leaving this place behind. Jesse came up beside her, his hand brushing against hers as he passed. He didn't speak at first, just stood there next to her, his eyes on the horizon. "I can't keep doing this," Caroline said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I can't keep running." Jesse didn't look at her. He simply nodded, as though he had expected this. "We don't have a choice." Caroline's chest tightened. "We always have a choice." Jesse turned to her then, his face hard, but there was something in his eyes, something soft, almost vulnerable. "Not this time." Caroline swallowed, the lump in her throat growing. She didn't know how to fix this. How to fix them. There was too much weight between them, too much unsaid. For a long moment, they both stood there, the wind kicking up dust around them, the sky a fading orange as the sun set in the distance. It felt like everything was falling apart. Like they were standing on the edge of something they couldn't escape. Jesse finally spoke, his voice low. "There's something I need to tell you." Caroline's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know if she was ready for this. Didn't know if she could handle whatever it was he was about to say. But she needed to know. She needed to understand. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jesse hesitated for a moment before speaking, his words slow and deliberate. "You're not just running from the law, Caroline. You're running from something bigger than that. Something you don't know about." Caroline's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Jesse's eyes flickered to the ground. "I made a deal with someone. A long time ago. And that deal's coming back to haunt us." Caroline's breath caught in her throat. "Who?" Jesse shook his head, his eyes dark. "It's not who. It's what. And it's too late to undo it." Caroline's stomach churned. "What are you saying, Jesse?" Jesse turned away, walking toward the car, his shoulders stiff. "I'm saying that no matter how far we run, no matter where we go, they'll find us. And they'll make us pay." Caroline stood frozen, her heart racing, the words echoing in her mind. She had never imagined that her life could spiral into something like this. She had never imagined that the choices she made, simple choices, at first, would lead her to a point of no return. But here they were. And now, it seemed like there was no escape. She looked down at her stomach, the life inside her a constant reminder of everything that had brought her to this point. She hadn't asked for any of this. She hadn't asked for the violence, for the fear, for the endless running. But there was no going back now. They were bound to this road, to this life. And all she could do was keep moving forward. The morning came too quickly, the light creeping in through the cracks in the barn's weathered walls. Caroline sat up, her back aching from the rough bedding, but she barely noticed the pain. The feeling that had settled into her chest the night before hadn't gone away. If anything, it was worse now, heavier, more suffocating. Jesse was already outside, his form silhouetted against the pale sky as he checked the car, loading their meager supplies. She could see the way his shoulders were set, stiff, like he was carrying a weight no one could understand. He didn't need to say a word. She already knew what he was feeling. Caroline stood and stretched, rubbing her eyes as the cold air hit her face. The night had been long, full of restless thoughts and nightmares that seemed to take root in her mind. The way Jesse had looked at her when he told her about the deal that haunted her most. It wasn't just the law they were running from now. It was something much bigger, something darker. And for the first time, she felt the weight of it. She reached for the small bag she had packed the night before and stepped outside. The dry wind bit at her skin, but the sight of Jesse, moving like a man who had seen the end of his road, was a reminder of what they had to do. "I think we need to talk about it," Caroline said, her voice quiet but firm as she walked up to him. Jesse didn't look at her at first. His hands were busy adjusting the straps on the car. "Not now." His voice was low, almost dismissive, but there was something else in it, a weariness she hadn't heard before. Caroline stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest. "No. I can't keep going like this. We need to talk." Finally, Jesse stopped what he was doing and turned to face her. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, regret, maybe, or resignation, but it was gone before it could fully settle. "What do you want me to say, Caroline? I want to know what we're running from. What we've really gotten ourselves into." She took a deep breath, her voice trembling with frustration. "I want to know what you did." Jesse's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Caroline thought he might walk away. But then he just stood there, his hands at his sides, his eyes cold but with a flicker of something else buried beneath them. "I told you," he said quietly. "I made a deal. A bad one. And now we're paying for it." Caroline's heart sank. "Who was it with, Jesse? Who are we running from?" Jesse shook his head, turning away. "I don't want to drag you into this any further, Caroline. You don't need to know." Caroline stepped closer, her voice cracking. "I need to know. You brought me into this. You've dragged me through every damn step of this life. I need to understand what I'm running from." Jesse turned back to her then, his eyes sharp and tired. "I don't care about you being scared anymore, Caroline. We don't have time for that." "But I'm not scared of you," she shot back, her voice suddenly strong. "I'm scared of what's coming. Of what you've brought into my life. You're a damn fool if you think I'm just going to sit back and let this happen." Jesse's face softened, the anger melting away as quickly as it had come. He didn't say anything for a long time. His eyes flickered to the horizon, his thoughts far away. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to pull you into it." "Then why did you?" Caroline asked, her voice breaking through the quiet. "Why didn't you leave me out of it? Why didn't you walk away when you had the chance?" Jesse turned back to her, his eyes haunted. "Because I couldn't. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I kept running, if I kept fighting, it would all go away." Caroline stood there, trying to process the weight of his words. "And now?" she asked softly. Jesse's gaze flickered to the car, then back to her. "Now, it's too late. There's no running anymore. The people I owe, they're going to come for us. They don't forget. And they don't forgive." Caroline's stomach twisted as she absorbed his words. She had heard the same thing over and over. It wasn't just the law anymore. It was something deeper. Something worse. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "I don't know if I can keep running from all of it." Jesse's expression softened, and for the first time, Caroline saw the man beneath the hardened exterior. The man who had been running for too long. "You don't have a choice," he said quietly. "None of us do." For a moment, there was silence between them. Caroline wanted to scream, to throw something, to ask why this was happening to her. Why it had to be her who got caught in this web of lies and violence. But instead, she just stood there, her mind spinning with the impossibility of it all. She thought about the life she had left behind, the family she had once known, the innocence she had once held. It all seemed like a distant dream now, a memory that she couldn't hold on to. Jesse cleared his throat, breaking the silence. We leave in an hour. Get your stuff ready. Caroline nodded, but as she turned away, she felt something shift inside her. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into that bank. She wasn't the same woman who had been dragged into this life by a man she barely knew. But the child inside her, that part of her, had to survive. She had to survive. And for the first time, Caroline realized that she would fight, not just for herself, but for what was growing inside her. She would fight for a future, even if it meant facing the darkness ahead. The days blurred together as they drove, stopping only when necessary. Every mile felt like a countdown, a race against the inevitable. Caroline kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead, trying not to look at the empty, barren stretches of land that passed by. The stillness outside mirrored the silence inside the car. They didn't talk much anymore. There was nothing left to say. Jesse was on edge, his eyes scanning the horizon constantly, his fingers gripping the wheel with the kind of tightness that spoke of a man who had long since given up hope. Caroline could feel it, too. The weight of the world pressing in on them. She had always thought that one day they would stop running, that they would find a place to call their own. But now, she realized that hope was just a lie. There was no peace for people like them. The road they traveled was winding, barely a path at all, and the car jolted with every bump in the uneven dirt. Caroline's back ached from the long hours of sitting, the tension in her body growing with every turn. She tried to breathe, tried to focus on the rhythm of the car, but it was hard when her mind kept drifting back to the chaos they had left behind: the robbery, the lawman, the gunshot, and the child inside her. She had never imagined this life, had never pictured herself here running with an outlaw, caught in a world of crime and danger. But this was the life she had now. It wasn't a life she had chosen, but it was the only one she had left. "Jesse," she said, her voice breaking the quiet. "What happens when we stop running?" He didn't look at her. He didn't even seem to hear her. His gaze was fixed on the road, his face hard. But after a long pause, he spoke. "We keep moving. That's all we can do." Caroline bit her lip, her mind racing. She had never imagined herself in a place like this, and the weight of it all felt too much to bear. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't go back. She had made her choices, and now she was bound to them. Bound to him. The silence between them stretched for what felt like hours, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional bump in the road. It wasn't until the sun began to dip low on the horizon that they reached their destination. A small, dilapidated cabin sat at the edge of the woods, half hidden by trees that seemed to swallow it whole. The place looked abandoned, as if it had been forgotten by time. But for them, it was just another place to hide, another place to wait. Jesse parked the car and killed the engine, his expression unreadable. He turned to Caroline, his gaze heavy. "We stay here for the night." Caroline didn't argue. She didn't care anymore. She was too tired to care. She just followed him as they made their way inside the cabin, the door creaking on its hinges as Jesse pushed it open. The interior was dark and musty, the air thick with the smell of old wood and dust. There was little in the way of furniture, just a couple of chairs, a small table, and a faded rug on the floor. It was bare, uncomfortable. But it was shelter. Caroline sank down onto the floor, her back against the wall as she tried to shake the fatigue from her bones. She was so tired. So utterly exhausted. But she couldn't sleep. Not with the weight of everything pressing in on her. Jesse started a fire in the small stove, the flickering flames casting shadows on the walls. The crackle of the fire was the only sound in the room, but it was enough to make the silence feel even heavier. "You ever think about quitting?" Caroline asked suddenly, her voice low. Jesse didn't answer right away. He just stared into the fire, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. "No," he said finally, his voice rough. "There's no quitting. Not for people like us." Caroline frowned, her thoughts churning. "What does that mean? People like us?" Jesse didn't look at her. His voice was distant, as if he was talking to himself more than to her. "People who don't have a choice. People who made mistakes, who can't ever go back. People who are always running, always looking over their shoulder. Caroline's heart tightened. She didn't want to be that person. She didn't want to be someone who was always running, always looking for the next place to hide. But she didn't know how to stop. She looked down at her hands, trembling slightly, her fingers curling into fists. She had made choices she couldn't take back. And now, she was here, with no way out. "We're not the same, Jessie," she said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're not the same people anymore." Jesse turned to her then, his expression softer than before, though his eyes were still guarded. "We never were." The words hung in the air between them, thick with the weight of everything they had been through. Caroline didn't know what to say. She didn't know if there was anything left to say. The fire crackled, the sound filling the silence as they both sat there, lost in their own thoughts. Caroline couldn't escape the feeling that something was changing, that the road ahead was different from the one she had been on. But what was it? Was it possible to escape this life? To leave behind the man she had become? The choices she had made? For the first time, Caroline wasn't sure if she could. She wasn't sure if there was a way back. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. "Maybe we don't have to run anymore," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Jesse looked at her, his face unreadable, his eyes narrowing. "You think they'll just let us walk away?" Caroline's chest tightened, her heart racing. She didn't know. She didn't have an answer. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel quite so alone. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to stop running. But the road ahead was still uncertain. And there was still so much to lose. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, the kind of day that seemed to swallow any hint of hope before it could even rise. The air was damp with the promise of rain, though the ground remained dry. It was the kind of day that felt like a weight, the kind that made you want to stay in bed and pretend nothing had changed. But for Caroline and Jesse, there was no staying still. There was no pretending. Jesse was already outside when Caroline woke, standing near the small creek that ran alongside the cabin. The water was low, only a trickle of the usual stream, but it was enough to provide a sense of calm. Caroline sat up slowly, the ache in her body reminding her that she hadn't slept well. The nightmares of the robbery, the shot she had fired, haunted her even as she opened her eyes. The child inside her stirred, a small reminder of what was still to come, but Caroline couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling deep in her gut. The past few days had been a blur, but she knew that she couldn't keep running forever. She dressed quickly, not bothering to fix her hair or care about how she looked. It didn't matter anymore. Nothing did except survival. Stepping outside, she found Jesse by the creek, his back turned to her. His posture was rigid, as though he was waiting for something to happen. Caroline didn't speak at first. She just stood there, watching him. "Jesse," she said quietly. He didn't turn, but his shoulders stiffened at the sound of her voice. "Yeah?" Caroline stepped closer, her heart thudding in her chest. "Are we really going to keep doing this? Keep running, keep hiding, keep pretending?" Jesse didn't answer immediately. He just stared at the creek, his hand resting on the rough bark of a nearby tree. "It's not pretending, Caroline. It's surviving." She shook her head, her throat tight with unshed tears. "But for how long? How much longer until this all catches up with us?" He turned to her then, his eyes hard but tired. "Until it ends. Until it's over." "Until what's over?" Caroline pressed, stepping forward, her voice rising in desperation. "Until we run out of road? Until we run out of time?" Jesse's jaw clenched. He looked at her, his expression softening for a brief moment. "Until they stop coming for us." Caroline looked away, the weight of his words settling deep into her bones. "And when will that be?" "Sooner than you think." The finality in his voice stopped her in her tracks. She didn't want to know the truth, but she had to ask. "Who's coming for us, Jesse? What do we owe them? What did you do?" For the first time, Jesse hesitated. His gaze flickered toward the ground, his hand tightening around the tree bark. "I already told you." I made a deal. A bad one. And now I'm paying for it. Caroline stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. But you never told me who you made the deal with. Who are we really running from? He turned to face her fully then, his eyes dark. People who don't forget. People who take what they want and leave nothing behind. They're not coming for you, Caroline. They're coming for me. Caroline swallowed, the weight of his words suffocating her. And what do they want? Jesse looked away, his jaw tight, his voice barely above a whisper. Everything. And I can't protect you from them. Caroline stepped back, her breath catching in her throat. She had always known there was something more to Jesse's past, something darker. But hearing him say it, hearing him admit it, hit her harder than she had ever expected. Her hands trembled at her sides. She had been running for so long, trying to outrun the life she didn't want, the life that had been thrust upon her. But now she realized there was no running from this. There was no escape. You've dragged me into this, Jesse, Caroline said, her voice quiet but firm. You've dragged us both into this. And now? I don't know how to get out. Jesse didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He knew the truth just as well as she did. They were bound to this life now, bound by choices they had made, bound by the people who had set their path. I never wanted you to get hurt, Jesse said after a long silence. I never wanted you to get caught up in my mess. Caroline shook her head. But I am caught up in it. We both are. They stood in silence for a long moment, the wind picking up around them, rustling the leaves in the trees. Caroline could feel the weight of everything, the choices they had made, the lives they had destroyed, the future that seemed more uncertain with each passing day. I won't let them hurt you, Jesse said finally, his voice low, full of resolve. Caroline's throat tightened. How can you promise that? How can you make that promise when you don't even know how to protect yourself? Jesse's eyes flashed with something that wasn't anger, but something close to it. Because I've survived. And I'll keep surviving. For both of us. Caroline felt the shift between them, the change in the air, like a storm was coming. She didn't know what to believe anymore, didn't know what Jesse was capable of. But one thing was certain, they couldn't keep running forever. She turned away from him, her mind racing. There was too much she didn't understand. Too much she couldn't fix. But as she walked away, the weight of Jesse's words settled deep inside her. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what was coming next, but she knew one thing, whatever it was, they would face it together. For better or worse. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Caroline stood at the edge of a small clearing, staring out at the road ahead, but her thoughts were far from the road. They always were. The constant journey, the unending, twisting path they had been on for what felt like an eternity, was beginning to take its toll. Jesse stood nearby, his back to her, his hand resting on the hood of the car, eyes scanning the horizon. He had been distant for days, not just in his words, but in his actions. Something had shifted in him. The quiet desperation that had been buried beneath his surface for so long was starting to crack through, and Caroline could see it, but he wouldn't speak of it. She wasn't sure what scared her more, the growing tension between them, or the growing realization that they were heading toward something neither of them was prepared for. A heavy silence hung in the air, broken only by the sound of a distant bird calling out. Caroline watched Jesse, feeling that familiar ache in her chest. "You've been quiet," she said softly, breaking the silence. Jesse didn't turn. Nothing to say. His voice was rough, flat. Caroline crossed her arms, trying to steady herself, trying to keep the shaking at bay. "Something's wrong." He finally turned to her, his eyes weary. "You don't think I know that?" His words weren't angry, just tired, bone-deep tired. He looked at her for a long moment, as if deciding how much to tell her. "We're running out of time, Caroline. We're running out of places to hide." Caroline swallowed, the weight of his words pressing against her chest. "What are you saying, Jesse?" His gaze dropped to the ground, his expression hardening again. "I'm saying we can't keep running forever. And soon enough, they'll find us. And when they do, it's over. The weight of his admission hit her hard. She had known this was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud, hearing it from him, was a different thing entirely. I can't keep living like this, she whispered, almost to herself. I can't keep pretending that we have a future. Jesse stepped closer, his face tense. You think I don't know that? I'm trying, Caroline. I'm trying to get us out of this, but I don't know how. Caroline's heart ached at the desperation in his voice, but she couldn't let herself soften. She couldn't let herself believe that they would find a way out. Not this time. What do we do now? She asked, her voice trembling despite herself. Jesse took a deep breath, his gaze still locked on the ground. We fight. She looked at him, unsure of what he meant. Fight? We fight for our lives, he said, his voice low but filled with an urgency that made her stomach tighten. We take the fight to them. We find them before they find us. If we're going to survive, we have to make them come to us. Caroline's mind raced. The idea of going after them, fighting back, felt like the only option left, but it terrified her. She wasn't sure if she was strong enough for that, wasn't sure if they could win. But what else could they do? She glanced at the car, then back at Jesse. You think we can win? Jesse looked at her for a long moment, his eyes piercing, but there was something else there, something like determination, something that made Caroline feel like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance. I don't know. But I'll be damned if we go down without a fight. The silence stretched between them. Caroline didn't know what to say. She didn't know if she believed they could win. She didn't even know if they should try. But she also knew that if they didn't, they would be dead soon enough. Jesse turned back toward the car, his movements deliberate. We leave tomorrow. At dawn. Caroline nodded, the weight of the decision settling deep inside her. This was it. This was the moment where everything changed. They couldn't keep running. They couldn't keep hiding. Not anymore. But the road ahead was treacherous, and the fight they were about to face wasn't just against the people who were hunting them. It was against themselves, against everything they had become. Caroline didn't know what was coming next. But she knew she couldn't walk away. Not now. She walked over to the car, her body heavy with the knowledge of what they had to do. The future felt impossible to grasp, but one thing was clear, whatever came next, they would face it together. And that was all they had left.